It's a special hour tonight on America's civil rights history. Which president actually first took the lead in securing equal rights for minorities? Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican. In 1953, he appointed this guy. This is Judge Earl Warren. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It was the Warren Court that Barack Obama likes to quote, appointed by a Republican, that ruled unanimously that segregated schools were unconstitutional. Well, this is the guy. He was appointed by Eisenhower. He was also the first president to appoint an African American to an executive level position in the White House. Frederick Morrow. He was the administrative officer for special projects. That guy right there. It was Eisenhower who was the first president's instruction to meet in the White House with black civil rights leaders. You got to be kidding me. Democrat Adlai Stevenson. Well, he wanted to change things. Here's Eisenhower. And here's the challenger, the Democratic challenger, Stevenson. He tried to accuse, again, of Eisenhower misleading the public, arguing that it was the Democrats that started desegregation in the armed forces, but they remember where desegregation started again, the progressives. But Eisenhower shot back. Remember, he was a general in World War II. He said, I was, quoting, I was the first combat commander that ever used Negroes incorporated actually into white units on the battlefield, end quote. Yeah, do you know any of this? Is it just me that missed this in school? The Civil Rights Act. Lyndon B. Johnson, the guy who gets credit for the passage. But it was actually Eisenhower. It was Eisenhower who in 1957 pushed to get the first civil rights bill passed. But 1964, that's when the civil rights bill finally passed. It actually had some teeth in it, could get the job done. Well, what happened in 1957? Well, what happened there? Well, what happened there is Congress. There was a senator who was the majority leader in Congress, and he wouldn't allow it to pass. He said Part 3 of this had to be taken out. Well, Eisenhower said, no. You kidding? Part 3 is the most important part. What was Part 3? It was designed to give the Attorney General authority to file suits to protect all constitutional rights, including school desegregation. In other words, the real problem, the teeth were taken out of that bill. It was nothing without it. That's why it wasn't until 7 years and multiple attempts later, after Martin Luther King and everything else, that a real civil rights bill was passed. So who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time that watered down the Civil Rights Bill, demanded that that was taken out? Anybody know? The guy who gets the credit. The hero of the left was the villain in 57 and the hero in 64. Interesting. Why don't we know that? Now, one former Democratic president who wasn't exactly a friend to Native Americans in his day. Democrats like Andrew Jackson passed things like this, the Indian Removal Act. It is what it sounds like. It was a removal of Indians from the United States, just moving them someplace else, either willingly or by force. The removal of Native Americans through the Indian Removal Act, which Jackson signed into law in 1830, wasn't a problem for him because it's manifest destiny. It's a perversion of divine providence. It's the belief that America is destined, bestowed by God, to spread across North America. Now, if you believe that America is destined to be a shining city on the hill, a shining example, a blessing to the world, not by force, I'm with you. But if you're destined to break every treaty we made, the ends justify the means, wipe out entire populations, and we're given that right by God, you're out of your mind. Don't get me wrong. The Whigs initially opposed the concept of manifest destiny. It was the Democrats and the Whigs. But both of them did it. Both of them. Both of them helped along the way, and they both helped prolong slavery. So why is it now that so many people believe that the government would be the key to solving all of our racial problems in this country. It's the government that enslaved people in the first place. It was the government that lied to, wiped out the Indians. How is it all of a sudden the government is the good guy? That they're the answer to everything that's a problem? Next, the Native American history that has been completely erased from the textbooks. Welcome back. The prevailing wisdom on Native Americans is now that they were primitive savages with inferior intellect. At least that's what we're taught that our founders and everybody else back then thought. That's not entirely true. Not everybody thought that way. George Washington loved the Indians. Thomas Jefferson had a very different view of Native Americans. In 1784, he dug out on his property a 12-foot high mound. It was something that he couldn't figure out. He found several complex layers of burials. He concluded that the mound was the work of Indian ancestors. Jefferson began to ponder this, and he believed that the Indians possibly came, in his words, from Egypt or Asia. He looked at some of the ancient writings. He compared them. He was fascinated with language. He compared Egyptian and Indian. He started to say, well, you know what? They're not as primitive as everybody thinks. Well, Jefferson, in many circles towards the late part of the 1700s, was attacked for his beliefs. He was called a howling atheist because of some of them. But John Adams was not one of them. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson did have a dispute on the American native, but it wasn't that they weren't savages. In their famous correspondence that happened in later years, they talked about the Native American and discussed James Adair's intriguing theory that the Indians were descendant from Jews because they had, according to Thomas Jefferson and Adair, the same laws, the same ceremonies, the same sacrifice, the same priests, prophets, and fast. Even the Indian dialect seemed derived from a common prototype of the Hebrew Bible. So they didn't brush off the Native American as wild animals. They were intrigued. Thomas Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out. Part of it was he wanted to see the burial mounds, find out what those are. Now, in the beginning, Jefferson was an outspoken advocate for Indian sovereignty. In 1793, he wrote, "The Indians had the full, undivided, and independent sovereignty as long as they chose to keep it, and that just might be forever." 2 years later, he added, "It may be taken for a certainty that not a foot of land will be taken from the Indians without their consent." Unfortunately, later, when commerce and government started to collude, when America needed land, things changed. By early 1800s, Jefferson sought ways to get Indians off their land without force. His first idea was to let the Indians, see if this sounds like a familiar tactic, let the Indians get deeply in debt, and then when they couldn't pay, they'd have no choice but to concede the land. Does history repeat itself? These next examples go against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. We first learned about them from a documentary called The Lost Civilizations of North America, which explores why the artifacts and evidences of ancient civilizations have been lost and largely ignored. America's history didn't begin with Christopher Columbus came over. There were ancient cities with advanced architectures all across North America. Did you know that? Hundreds of years before Columbus came. We always think, oh, the Indians, they didn't scour the land. No, not true. These were cities as large as any in the world at the time. London or Rome, they were metropolises. Archaeologists say they have found evidence of 200,000 actual cities of mound-like structures all across North America that were here long before Columbus. But we don't know anything about them. Why? I want you to take a look at this. This is going to blow your mind. See this here? First, let me show you the Great Pyramid of Giza. You've seen this, one side of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you measure it, it is from the bottom to the apex 606 feet. That's important. That's an ancient unit of measurement. It's referred to as the stade. Now I want to show you this. These are the Newark earthworks. They're here in Ohio. Yes, Ohio. The earthworks are made, they're structures that are made now of earth that has been built up from the ground in a perfect circle. Here it is, a perfect circle and a perfect octagon. But they were built by the ancient Hopewell civilization. They date back from 300 BC to 400 AD. So let's look at these structures here. Bring this up. I want to show you something. If you square the inside of the octagon, here's a square and here's a square. If you square it, this is what surveyors do when they're measuring. They square the circle, and then they divide that area into 4 equal parts, or cubes, and then you find that each cube is made up of 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet. 606. It's made up of stades, exactly the same. Now, if that's not interesting enough, look at the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the slope is 51.8 degrees. Let's go back to the earthworks. If you measure the line that goes straight through the center of the structure, right here, and then you go true north, it's 51.8 degrees. That angle is exactly the same angle as the pyramids of Giza. It is the same math, the same calculations as ancient Egyptians. Let me show you one more connection. In 1860, David Wyrick, he's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks, and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box that was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here at first they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the 10 Commandments. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio, and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes. And that's what we focus on in America, is we were bad to the American Indians. Forget about it. It's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today? Native American history restored. We all know how slavery in America ended with the Civil War, but does anybody in America even know anymore how it all began? Next.